As Sophia's laughter echoed through the hotel lobby, I sat just a few feet away, hidden in plain sight. She had no idea I was watching, her secrets unraveling before my eyes. When she called later, her voice casual and sweet, she thought I was at home, oblivious. But I wasn't. I was right behind them, capturing every damning moment. That was the beginning of my revenge, and trust me, it was brutal. But before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on what comes next. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where every house looked picture perfect, hiding lives that were anything but. Ethan and Sophia lived in one of those houses, a couple who seemed to have it all: success, stability, and the kind of love that made others envious. Ethan, a thoughtful and methodical man, prided himself on loyalty and trust. Sophia, his wife of 10 years, was the opposite: vibrant, ambitious, always chasing the next big thing. Their life together was built on a foundation Ethan thought was solid. In his own untrue behavior, he'd thought himself resurrected. However, Ethan had troubled accepting that he, perhaps, was just beginning to grasp the truth of life. But cracks began to show. Late nights became frequent. Sophia's laugh, once warm and inviting, now felt distant. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, was always with her now. Ethan's gut told him something was wrong, but Sophia's reassurances kept his doubts at bay. For a while. Then there was Ryan, a name Ethan didn't know yet but would soon come to despise. A stranger who would change everything. In a world of whispered lies and quiet betrayals, Ethan would uncover the truth. But knowing the truth and living with it are two different things. The unraveling of their life together was about to begin, and Ethan was determined to take control of the narrative. Trust, Ethan always believed, was the foundation of any relationship. But trust, he realized, could be fragile, shattered not by a single blow, but by a series of small, almost imperceptible cracks. At first, it was easy to dismiss the changes. Sophia had always worked late from time to time, her demanding job often keeping her at the office long after dark. But these late nights became more frequent, and her reasons more vague. "Team dinner," she would say casually, brushing off his questions. Her smile, once reassuring, now felt distant, forced. The shift in her habits was subtle but unmistakable. She stopped leaving her phone on the kitchen counter, where it had always sat untouched. Now it was glued to her side, slipped into her pocket or clutched in her hand, even as she moved from room to room. Ethan couldn't ignore the way she tilted the screen away from his line of sight, or the faint sound of her muffled laughter when she thought he wasn't listening. He wanted to trust her. He told himself over and over that this was paranoia, that the stress of his own job was making him read too much into things. Yet the doubts refused to stay buried. They whispered to him at night as he lay awake, watching the faint glow of Sophia's phone illuminate her face while she scrolled through messages she refused to share. Ethan started noticing other things: the scent of expensive perfume clinging to her clothes, a kind she didn't wear, and a trace of red wine on her breath when she came home. The stories she told about her evenings became more disjointed, her explanations too rehearsed. Then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, Ethan got home early, excited to surprise Sophia with dinner. From the window, he watched as her car pulled into the driveway. She sat in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was soft, her smile private, almost intimate. It was a look he hadn't seen her give him in months. When she finally stepped inside, Ethan asked casually, "Who were you talking to?" "Just work stuff," she replied, her tone light, as she disappeared into the bedroom. That moment stayed with him. No longer could he ignore the knot in his stomach, the creeping sense that his marriage was slipping through his fingers. The cracks were growing deeper, and Ethan knew he had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. The late nights became routine, each one accompanied by a vague excuse that did little to ease Ethan's growing unease. "Another client meeting," she would say, as she adjusted her coat at the door, or "team bonding, just drinks after work." At first, Ethan nodded along, forcing himself to believe her words. But the unease lingered, a shadow that followed him through his days and haunted him in the quiet of their shared home. It wasn't just the late nights, though. there were other things, small but unmistakable. Sophia's perfume had changed. Something richer, more expensive, with a lingering floral note he couldn't place. When Ethan asked about it, she brushed him off with a laugh. "A gift from a coworker," she said, her tone breezy, almost dismissive. Then there was her phone, once a harmless accessory that sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. Now it was always with her, clutched in her hand or tucked into her pocket. Ethan noticed how she would angle the screen away when a message came in, or how her laughter would trail off if she caught him watching. One night, he heard her murmuring softly on the phone in the bathroom. When she emerged, she claimed it was a work call, though her flushed cheeks and hastily composed expression told a different story. Ethan tried to tell himself it was nothing, that he was imagining things. But doubt has a way of growing, and soon he was seeing signs everywhere. The clothes she wore to her meetings were different. Sleek dresses he hadn't seen her wear in months. Her stories about her evenings grew inconsistent, full of pauses and hurried corrections. The isolation was the hardest part. Their once easy conversations had become strained, filled with empty pleasantries. Ethan felt the gulf between them widening, and no matter how hard he tried to bridge it, Sophia seemed to pull further away. One evening, as Sophia laughed at a text she refused to share, Ethan felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. He was a stranger in his own marriage, trapped in a house that no longer felt like home. The suspicion gnawed at him, eroding his peace of mind. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the woman he loved was slipping away, taking with her the life they had built together. Something was wrong, he was sure of it now, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he would have to confront the truth. The tipping point came on a quiet Thursday evening. Sophia was in the shower, her phone buzzing faintly on the nightstand. Ethan's gaze lingered on it longer than he intended. She had never been secretive about her phone before, and yet lately it had become an extension of her hand, always within reach. He told himself it was harmless curiosity as he picked it up, but the cold pit in his stomach told another story. The lock screen revealed nothing, just a string of notifications from social apps and work emails. When he tried to access her messages, he realized she had set a new passcode. That was new. That was deliberate. It didn't stop him. Later that week, when Sophia left the room for a moment, she forgot to lock her phone. Ethan took his chance, scrolling quickly through her messages. What he found wasn't damning. No explicit conversations, no suspicious names. But her call logs were empty, completely cleared. The discovery took Albert 5 minutes to count, and then Barney saw him away with Connor. A knot tightened in his chest. Clearing call logs wasn't something Sophia had ever done before. It was too precise, too purposeful. He placed the phone back where he'd found it, heart pounding, and decided to dig deeper. A few days later, while organizing bills, Ethan noticed a charge that caught his attention. The Mayfair Hotel. It wasn't their anniversary. They hadn't been there together. The amount, $142.60, stood out. A number too specific to overlook. He flipped through more statements, finding nothing else unusual, but the single charge was enough to ignite a fire of suspicion. That evening, over dinner, he brought it up casually, trying to keep his tone light. "Hey, I noticed a charge at the Mayfair Hotel last week. Did we go there, or am I forgetting something?" Sophia didn't flinch, but her reply was almost too smooth. "Oh, that. It was a work thing. A client dinner ran late, so we stayed for drinks afterward. I must have picked up the tab." Ethan nodded, forcing a smile, but something about her explanation didn't sit right. Her tone was breezy, almost rehearsed. She didn't meet his eyes for long, her attention shifting quickly to her food. "Huh?" After that, he couldn't let it go. Sophia had given him an answer, but the doubts lingered. The next day, he began taking steps he never thought he would. He installed a GPS tracker in her car, justifying it as a means to find the truth he desperately needed. Each step felt like a betrayal of the man he thought he was, but the growing ache in his chest pushed him forward. Over the following week, he tracked her movements. Most of her trips were predictable, to the office, to the grocery store, to her yoga class. But on Friday, her routine shifted. Instead of heading to her usual spots, her car parked downtown, at the Mayfair Hotel. Ethan sat in his car, parked a block away, watching the GPS signal on his phone. He debated confronting her, imagined storming into the lobby and demanding answers. But he stayed put, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. When Sophia returned home that evening, her mood was light, her demeanor unbothered. Ethan asked how her day had gone, his voice calm, his face neutral. She smiled and mentioned another client meeting, offering no further details. Inside, Ethan was unraveling. The hotel charge, the empty call logs, the secretive behavior, it all pointed to something he wasn't ready to say out loud. But he didn't lash out. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he decided to gather more evidence. He needed proof, not for her, but for himself. He needed to know if his doubts were justified, if the life they'd built together was built on lies. As he lay in bed that night, Sophia sleeping soundly beside him, Ethan stared at the ceiling. His mind raced with plans. Surveillance wasn't just a choice, it had become a necessity. The truth was out there, and he was determined to find it, no matter the cost to his peace, his pride, or his heart. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon, when Ethan decided he couldn't wait any longer. The GPS tracker on Sophia's car showed her heading downtown, not to the mall or any of her usual spots, but back to the Mayfair Hotel. The knot in his stomach tightened as he followed the blinking dot on his phone. His hands gripped the steering wheel as the cityscape blurred around him. When he arrived, he parked a block away, his heart pounding. From his vantage point, he could see her car in the hotel's lot, parked neatly in a corner. Ethan sat for a moment, fighting the urge to storm inside. Instead, he adjusted his jacket, grabbed his phone, and stepped out into the cool afternoon air. The lobby doors slid open with a quiet hiss as Ethan entered. The scent of polished wood and expensive cologne hit him, mingling with a low hum of conversation and faint piano music. He scanned the space, his breath shallow. And then, he saw them. Sophia stood by the elevator, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man Ethan didn't recognize. The man was tall, impeccably dressed, his posture radiating confidence. They were laughing, their heads tilted toward each other as if sharing a private joke. Ethan froze, his world narrowing to the sight in front of him. Sophia's face glowed with a softness he hadn't seen in months. Her laugh, once his favorite sound, now felt like a slap. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from the man's face, her touch lingering. The rage hit Ethan first, sharp and blinding. It surged through him, demanding action. He imagined striding across the lobby, pulling the man away from her, shouting his pain for everyone to hear. But then came the devastation, heavier than he'd expected. It sat in his chest like a stone, stealing his breath. Stealing himself, Ethan reached for his phone. His hands trembled as he raced it, snapping photos of the pair. Each click felt like driving a nail into his heart, but he couldn't stop. He needed proof, not just for himself, but for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. As the elevator arrived, Sophia and the man stepped inside. The doors slid shut, and they were gone. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, the faint ding of the elevator echoing in his ears. He walked out of the lobby, the cool air hitting his face like a slap. Leaning against a column, he scrolled through the photos, each image confirming what his heart had already known. Sophia's betrayal wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real, undeniable, and staring back at him from his screen. When his phone buzzed moments later, the name on the screen made him laugh bitterly. It was Sophia. "Hey," she said brightly when he answered. "Just shopping with Julie. I'll be home late, so don't wait up." Ethan forced a steady tone. "Sure, take your time." As he hung up, he stared out at the city, his jaw clenched. The truth was no longer a question. It was a weapon, and Ethan knew he would use it. But not yet. Not like this. For now, he would wait. The weight of his evidence fueling the storm brewing inside him. Sophia's lies grew more elaborate, her excuses delivered with the same practiced ease. One evening, she smiled over dinner, her tone casual as she said, "I'll be working late tomorrow. I've heard breakfast meetings around 4, if you'd like to join me." We're after work. Ethan nodded, his expression unbothered, his smile perfectly measured. You sound like you're laughing anyway, despite being extremely sad. But inside, the storm churned. Every word out of her mouth felt like a mockery, a deliberate test of how much he could endure. Ethan's calm wasn't indifference, it was strategy. His silence, his lack of confrontation, wasn't weakness, it was control. The photographs of her with Ryan, saved carefully on his phone, were his reminder of the truth. Each time Sophia lied to his face, he thought of those images, using them to steel himself. She'd thought he was blind, and that misconception gave him power. Ethan began planning. The first step was precision. He tracked her patterns, noting when she left, where she claimed to go, and how long she stayed away. Each detail fit into a larger puzzle. He started small, observing, recording, analyzing. Her behavior offered clues she didn't realize she was leaving. The faint slip in her voice when she said Ryan's name in passing. The tension in her shoulders when he asked an innocent question. Ethan knew that anger, if unleashed too soon, would destroy his chance for justice. Revenge required patience and a cool head. As Sophia laughed at another text she wouldn't share, Ethan smiled back. The storm inside him was no longer chaotic. It was controlled, focused. He wasn't just a husband betrayed. He was a man preparing for war, determined that when the truth came crashing down, it would be on his terms. And Sophia wouldn't see it coming. Ethan's plan began with subtlety. He understood that effective revenge wasn't about rushing in, but about dismantling a person's life piece by piece. His first steps were small, nearly imperceptible. One evening, while Sophia was at work, Ethan went into her closet. He wasn't searching for evidence. He was taking her favorite things. A scarf she loved in winter, a bracelet her mother had given her. Gone. The next day, she stood in front of the mirror, puzzled. Have you seen my bracelet? She asked, her brow furrowed. Maybe you misplaced it, Ethan replied, his tone neutral. Her confusion was a tiny crack, the first of many. Next, he switched her perfume, replacing the expensive bottle she favored with a cheap imitation. He watched her wrinkle her nose the next morning. Must be a bad batch, she muttered, tossing the bottle. Ethan said nothing, savoring the flicker of irritation on her face. 10 minutes later, he wrapped around the corner. But it wasn't enough to unsettle Sophia. Ryan needed to feel the weight of Ethan's anger too. A carefully crafted anonymous email sent to Ryan's employer included one of the photos Ethan had taken outside the Mayfair Hotel. The subject line read, "Are your employees upholding company values?" Ryan's workplace, a small marketing firm, responded swiftly. By the end of the week, whispers had turned into outright accusations, and Ryan was fired. Sophia came home tense, throwing her bag onto the couch. Ryan says someone's spreading rumors about him, she said, her voice sharp. Ethan raised an eyebrow, feigning interest. Weird, he replied, watching her squirm. The tension between them grew. Ethan decided to push further, sending a fake message from Sophia's phone to Ryan late one night. I think Ethan knows. We need to stop this. Deleting the sent message, he waited for her to notice the next morning. Sophia stared at her phone, her face pale as she read Ryan's response. What do you mean? Did he say something? Something wrong? Ethan asked, his voice casual. No, just weird, she murmured, forcing a laugh, but the crack in her composure was unmistakable. The final blow was public, as Ethan had planned all along. He hosted a dinner party at their house, inviting close friends and neighbors. Sophia reluctantly played the part of the gracious hostess, but Ethan could see her nerves in the way she fidgeted. After dinner, Ethan stood to make a toast. He smiled warmly, his voice calm. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's been a rough few months, but I've learned that loyalty and trust are the most important things in life. Sophia's relief was brief. Ethan picked up her remote, clicking it to display the TV behind him. A slideshow of photos appeared. Sophia and Ryan entering the Mayfair Hotel, laughing together in the lobby, their intimacy undeniable. The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sophia's face turned ashen. Ethan? she hissed, her voice shaking. "What are you doing?" Ignoring her, Ethan continued. "It's a reminder about honesty in relationships. Some people need to learn that the hard way." The fallout was immediate. Guests whispered, their expressions shifting to judgment and disgust. Sophia's carefully constructed world crumbled in real time. Her once firm social standing disintegrated before her eyes. The next day, Sophia's workplace launched an investigation into her alleged misconduct after an anonymous email, crafted by Ethan, hinted at falsified expenses and an inappropriate relationship with a coworker. Within days, she was demoted and ostracized by her colleagues. Ryan, too, was spiraling. Unable to find work, he became increasingly paranoid, convinced someone was out to ruin him. Meanwhile, Sophia and Ryan's once cozy affair turned into a web of blame and resentment. Ethan watched it all with cold satisfaction. His revenge wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about ensuring Sophia and Ryan's betrayal left scars as deep as the ones they'd inflicted on him. The final moves were in place, and their perfect little world was falling apart, just as he'd planned. Sophia's once glossy world unraveled quickly, piece by piece. The whispers began immediately after the dinner party. Friends who once welcomed her with warm smiles now avoided her gaze at the grocery store. Invitations to brunch and book clubs disappeared. The social circle she had so carefully cultivated turned its back on her, leaving only cold judgment and silent rejection. At work, the consequences were swift. Her boss summoned her to a meeting where the anonymous accusations of falsified expenses were brought to light. Though she denied them, the evidence was damning. Her reputation, once pristine, was now marred by scandal. By the end of the week, Sophia was reassigned to a lesser role in a remote satellite office. A thinly veiled demotion. She came home that evening pale and shaking, slamming her bag onto the counter. "They're transferring me," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't feign surprise. "It happens," he replied evenly, watching her crumble under the weight of her decisions. Meanwhile, Ryan's downfall was no less dramatic. His firing had sent shockwaves through his professional network, and news of his indiscretions spread fast. Once charming and self-assured, he was now desperate and paranoid. He couldn't land another job, and unpaid bills began to pile up. Even his few remaining friends distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with his tarnished name. Ethan observed it all from a quiet distance, detached and calculating. He'd ensured their betrayals had consequences that neither could escape. When the divorce papers were finally served, Sophia didn't argue. She simply nodded, defeated, as Ethan explained that he was done. Their choices had led them here, and now they were paying the price. Ethan walked away without a backward glance, ready to leave the wreckage of their lives behind and reclaim his own. The divorce proceedings were swift, but Ethan ensured they were meticulous. He presented undeniable evidence of Sophia's betrayal, photos, texts, and financial records showing how she had used joint funds for her trysts. The judge's decision left little sympathy for Sophia. Ethan retained the house, the majority of their savings and key assets, while Sophia was left with her car and a modest alimony payment, barely enough to scrape by. Sophia's new life was a stark contrast to the one she had once flaunted. She moved into a cramped, dimly lit apartment on the edge of town. The elegant furniture and designer clothes she once cherished were replaced by second-hand pieces and worn outfits. She took a job far below her qualifications, her once bright career dimmed by the whispers that followed her. Each day seemed heavier for Sophia, her once confident demeanor replaced by exhaustion and regret. She avoided the places she once frequented, unable to bear the judgmental stares of former friends. Even her family kept their distance, their disappointment in her palpable. Ryan's fate was even more severe. After losing his job and reputation, he vanished. Friends speculated he had left the city, unable to face the consequences of his actions. No one knew where he had gone, and no one cared. He had become a ghost, a cautionary tale and a story of betrayal and ruin. Meanwhile, Ethan began to rebuild. The house, once filled with memories of their life together, was transformed into a reflection of his new beginning. The pain that had consumed him for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. The contrast was striking. Sophia and Ryan, shadows of their former selves, lost in the wreckage they had created. Ethan, scarred but stronger, stepped into a future that was finally his to shape. As the dust settled, Ethan found himself sitting alone in the quiet house that was once a shared home. The rage that had driven him, the cold satisfaction of executing his revenge, had dulled. In its place was something far less definable, an emptiness that clung to him like fog, refusing to lift. At first, he told himself he had won. Sophia's life was in shambles, Ryan had disappeared, and the betrayal that once burned in his chest had been avenged. But the satisfaction was fleeting. Late at night, as he sat in the stillness, he began to wonder, had it been worth it? The revenge had consumed him, pulling him into a darkness he didn't know he was capable of. Each calculated step, each blow he dealt, had come at a cost. In dismantling Sophia's life, had he lost a part of himself? He thought about the man he used to be, the one who believed in trust and loyalty, the one who valued love above all else. That man felt like a stranger now, someone buried beneath months of anger and bitterness. But with the emptiness came clarity. Ethan realized he didn't want to live in the shadow of what had happened. The betrayal had defined him for too long, and if he continued to hold on to it, he would be trapped forever. Rebuilding began slowly. He reached out to his sister Maggie, who had always been there, waiting patiently for him to find his way back. On her back porch, over beers and long conversations, Ethan started to unpack the weight he'd been carrying. "You did what you had to," Maggie said one evening, her voice steady, "but don't let them keep taking pieces of you. It's time to let go." Her words stayed with him. Ethan began reconnecting with friends he had pushed away during his descent into revenge. He rediscovered hobbies he had abandoned, spent evenings reading instead of replaying old memories, and found solace in the small moments of peace that slowly crept back into his life. The anger that had once fueled him was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward. Sophia and Ryan were a chapter of his past, painful, unforgettable, but no longer a part of his future. Ethan wasn't just healing, he was rebuilding, piece by piece, the man he wanted to be. And this time, he would let nothing and no one take that away. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Ethan's phone rang. The name flashing on the screen stopped him cold. Sophia. He hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. For a moment, he debated ignoring it, but something inside him urged him to pick up. "Ethan," Sophia's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. I need to talk. Can we meet?" Ethan's initial instinct was to refuse, but curiosity, or perhaps a lingering need for closure, won out. Fine," he said curtly, "but don't expect sympathy." "Therapy must have clear spinal scars," admitted Safety. They met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. Sophia looked different. Her once flawless appearance was replaced by exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes hung loosely as if she'd stopped caring. "Thank you for coming," she began, her hands twisting nervously. "I know I hurt you. I destroyed everything, and I'm so sorry." I stared at her. "Did you expect me to speak clearly, or did you hope I would jump out at you?" Thanks to what Arthur told me, I began to see how true that phrase was. Cycling through painful memories had been a constant battle for him, trying to shake the feelings from his face unreadable. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I regret everything. I was selfish and I lost the best thing in my life." When she finished, Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Do you know what's funny?" he said, his voice cold. "You never cared about how your choices affected me. Now that your life is in ruins, you're here for what? Redemption? Closure?" Sophia flinched but didn't argue. Ethan stood, his tone steady. "You made your choices, Sophia. Now you have to live with them. I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you anything." With that, he walked out, leaving her sitting alone, her tears falling silently into her untouched coffee. That meeting marked the final chapter in Ethan's old life. He returned home that night with a renewed sense of purpose. He began methodically clearing out every reminder of Sophia. The clothes she had left behind, the photos she insisted on buying, the circumstances that had caused these painful memories. The house, which had once felt like a prison, became a blank canvas. He repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, and filled the spaces with things that reflected him, not them. It was a slow but therapeutic process, each change symbolizing a step forward. Ethan also reached out to people he had distanced himself from during his ordeal. His sister Maggie welcomed him back with open arms, offering the kind of unconditional support he hadn't realized he needed. Over beers on her back porch, Ethan confessed everything. "I went too far, didn't I?" he asked, half joking. Maggie shook her head. "They deserved it. But now it's time to move on. Don't let them keep taking pieces of you." Her words stayed with him. Ethan realized that while revenge had given him temporary satisfaction, it wasn't the key to healing. True peace would come from letting go and rebuilding himself. He started small, hiking trails he hadn't explored in years, reading books that had gathered dust on his shelves, reconnecting with old hobbies. Slowly, the emptiness that had replaced his anger began to fill with something else. Hope. One evening, sitting on his newly decorated back porch, Ethan looked out at the horizon. The air was crisp, the silence comforting. For the first time in months, he felt truly at peace. The pain and betrayal were still part of his story, but they no longer defined him. The future was uncertain, but it was his, and that was enough. As Ethan stood on his back porch, the sun dipping below the horizon, he felt the weight of the past lift, leaving only the faint scars of a hard-fought battle. Revenge had been costly, stripping away parts of himself he could never reclaim. Yet, as he stared at the vibrant hues of the setting sun, he realized it had been necessary, a brutal reckoning that set him free. "Not all endings are clean," he murmured to himself, a faint smile on his lips. "But sometimes, ashes are the best place to start again." And with that, he stepped forward, ready for whatever came next.